Nobody in Atlanta wanted Bill Belichick, but it now seems like everybody is starting to want Texas defensive tackle Byron Murphy in round one.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. And yes, I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it is a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. So, guys, if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman. Been covering the Falcons for far too long, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP. And, of course, I appreciate each and every one of you that is an everydayer of this podcast. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest episode as soon as it is available. So, on today's episode, I am, of course, joined by Jarvis Davis of Locked On Sports Atlanta. We're going to talk a lot about the Falcons draft options. Is DT, D tackle, an option in round one? And, you know, what's a scenario where the Falcons can go all in on upgrading their front seven? I know that's a dream come true for Jarvis Davis, but we're going to start today's episode revisiting the Raheem Morris hire because ESPN dropped an article this week talking about how Bill Belichick didn't get hired this cycle and some of the whys and hows of that. And of course, given that the Falcons were the only team involved with interviewing Bill Belichick, you know, they were heavily featured in their process, was featured in the piece. And, you know, a lot of stuff involving Belichick and why other teams weren't as interested in him beyond the Falcons, including concerns about him potentially coming into an organization and then blowing up the building and then 2 years later retiring and not having a firm succession plan. You know, those were many of the topics that we discussed on this illustrious podcast back in January during this coaching hiring cycle as one of the reasons why we were not fans of the Falcons hiring Bill Belichick. But another interesting nugget that came out of that article was that, you know, Raheem Morris was the unanimous choice among the top decision makers in Atlanta, which we assume are, you know, owner Arthur Blank, former CEO Rich McKay, and general manager Terry Fontenot. And it was Mike McDonald, now with the Seattle Seahawks, who was sort of the consensus second choice, and then Bobby Slowick, who did not get hired this cycle, as the Houston Texans offensive coordinator, sort of as a third choice. And so, Jarvis, I ask you, you know, hearing all of this stuff come out and sort of circling back to what the world was like 3 months ago when the Falcons were going through this hiring process, what were your thoughts on sort of seeing this article?
I thought it confirmed what we already were thinking, or definitely what I was thinking, you know, as we were going through this process, as far as like thinking about who would be a good fit for the Falcons, right? Because when you think about Bill Belichick, he's 71, will be 72, about to be 72, or is 72 at this point. And you're talking, and all I heard was as far as benefits of it, and you talking about chasing Don Shula's record, and he only 15 wins away, and you know, and bringing on, which almost made me throw up. I talked about this on the Atlanta sports party, excuse me, about how Joe Judge and Matt Patricia and Josh McDaniels, I just cringed when I heard that he was going to try to bring those same assistant coaches on and hire those guys. So for those reasons, I really felt like that was the big reason why I didn't want Bill Belichick, because a lot of people, you know, some probably won't admit it, but they were, you know, fascinated. Oh, look at those Super Bowls. He got 8 Super Bowls, 6 as a head coach, 2 as a defensive coordinator. Oh, he's going to bring them down here with him and put them in Flowery Branch, and we can act like they're ours. No, that's not how it works. We're talking about recent memory. What have you done for me lately? We know what the NFL is, and we know how when you're talking about projecting 2 to 3 years from now, what is Bill Belichick? What has he done for the Atlanta Falcons? The answer probably would have been probably close to the same of what he was doing in the last 5 years at New England. So I really feel like, you know, for this article to come out and talking about how the top 3 choices for all of those guys, man, Bill Belichick wasn't on any of them, and they did the second interview out of respect. It lets me know that, hey, you know, my thoughts and feels were being reflected up there in Flower Branch as well.
Yeah, I think so too. One of the things I said back in January was it's 2024, not 2004. And I think that was sort of the core of the issue with Belichick. A great coach for a very long time. You cannot take away any of the things that he achieved. I thought it was funny seeing him recently on Pat McAfee's show, and they had in the background all the Lombardi trophies, and he made sure that the camera, was just like here so that you could see all the trophies in the back. So it's like, I got this. So, as much as I was like, I don't want Belichick here in Atlanta, there's a part of me that's like, look, Belichick, I respect the man because this man is like the king of petty. And there's a part of me that, Jarvis, but I'm so humble. But that sort of small part of me that's a little petty. I'm like, we are kindred spirits in that regard. So, that was one thing that kind of came out of this week that I was like, oh yeah, that would have been fun. I don't know if the on-field product would have been as fun as maybe that aspect of it. But yeah, it was interesting sort of hearing that and, revisiting some of the thought processes and opinions, back in January that we expressed on the podcast that are now like, yeah, this is how a lot of other people in the NFL were thinking. And that's a big reason why, no one else was particularly interested in Belichick. And obviously we'll see what happens, in this next coaching hiring cycle. But, things aren't necessarily looking that optimistic that he's going to get that opportunity to break that, Shula record moving forward. But we will move forward from Bill Belichick and we'll get more to what is the topic of the week as we are a week away from the 2024 NFL draft. And is there more buzz building for the Falcons to potentially take a defensive tackle in the first round? And we'll break that down as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. Now, guys, most of my life I've lived paycheck to paycheck, and thankfully Locked On has been very good for me these past few years, so I don't have to think that way, and I can start planning for my long-term financial future. And I don't want to go back to living paycheck to paycheck now that I have a little bit more stable income. And Yahoo Finance, our proud sponsor today, is giving me the tools so that I don't have to go back and I can grow my savings into so much more. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor, whether you're a seasoned investor or you're like me, just looking for that extra guidance to get started. Yahoo Finance is giving you all the tools and data you need in one place. They are the #1 finance destination, and you can stay on top of the financial news cycle with their breaking news, their analysis, their editorials. They have independent research, customizable charts, and so much more. And if you're looking for comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com, the #1 financial destination, yahoofinance.com. That's yahoofinance.com. So continuing today's Locked On Falcons with Jarvis Davis of Locked On Sports Atlanta, I want to plug the Locked On Podcast Network, which just dropped the ultimate 6-episode series of the Locked On NFL Mock Draft, now available on Locked On NFL Draft Podcast. You can get all 6 parts, including who I had taking in round 1, and I don't think Jarvis was particularly happy about it, but go check it out right now. Locked On NFL Draft, the Locked On Mock Draft, available Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. So Jarvis, a player or position that I'm sure you're probably a little bit more invested in the Falcons taking early is, somebody that can, make a difference up front in terms of the pass rush. And it's interesting because, there's been a lot more talk over the last couple of days about the potential possibility the Falcons may not take that edge rusher, high. And Daniel Jeremiah did his, week before the draft conference call, and he was asked a question about whether the Falcons are kind of locked in on Dallas Turner or, are the medicals really going to hurt Laiatu Latu? And his answer kind of involved that, there are some teams that aren't as concerned about Latu's medicals and others are. And he also noted that he wouldn't, quote, ink Dallas Turner to Atlanta and wouldn't rule out other possibilities for them in round 1. And that segued into him mentioning Byron Murphy, the defensive tackle from Texas, as a potential surprise top 10 pick. And he also sort of mentioned his perception that the drop-off in talent from round 1 and after at D tackle is actually steeper than the one at edge, which is kind of contrary to what we've been talking about for weeks and months now, that basically once you get past the top 3 edges, there's nobody else in this draft class. And I did a podcast last week with Charles McDonald of Yahoo Sports, talking about the possibility of the Falcons maybe trading back and taking a D tackle like Murphy or Johnny Newton of Illinois. And of course, as I mentioned, a lot more people have been talking about it the last couple of days in various other places. And once again, people are outing themselves as everydayers of this podcast, including Daniel Jeremiah. But of course, I wouldn't say that because I'm so humble.
Of course it is.
But,
come on.
All this to say, Jarvis, what are your thoughts on the idea of the Falcons potentially taking one of these top defensive tackles in round 1?
To be honest with you, I wouldn't be mad at it, because here's the thing, man. We look at what Grady Jarrett is. He's coming off of a season injury. He be coming back from that this year. He's on the plus side of 30. And, if you look at opposite him, David Onyemata, he's there too. He's right there. So when you think about that age range of those defensive tackles, like, you have to start thinking about the future, and not only the future, but right now as well. So in order for me to, as a general manager, I'm gonna put my hat on for a second. It's from a line of thinking standpoint. Okay, how can I prepare myself for the future at this spot, and also have a guy good enough to come in and make an immediate impact, so he can help me out in the short term as well. So when you think about, and that's what you do when you get talking about first round and second round guys, right? So I would not be mad at it at all. And when you start sprinkling the name of Byron Murphy, I'll tell you, when I was first introduced to Byron Murphy, I came across one of his cut-ups of him taking on a double team. I was just like, man, this is like art to me. When you're talking about being able to extend your arms, get those arms out, get that lineman with his back straight, and kind of sitting up there and holding what he got, and then that guard comes down, he kind of leans in, and it's kind of to kind of split that bad boy, you anchor down, and then once that ball gets there, either that guard got to make a decision. Either he's going to stick right there, or he's going to try to get up to the next level. And a lot of times, Murphy was coming off making a tackle, man. Like, not only he did he do his job, which was to make that guard make a decision, right? But the second part is, which is like so extra, which kind of tells you like the level of play that this guy is playing at. He's actually coming off that tackle and making that doggone tackle, man, and putting that doggone running back on the ground. And like, I love seeing stuff like that. So he was pretty consistent about that. Also, another thing that really stood out to me with him is the fact that he's a guy that diagnosed blocks like quickly. Like, we talking about down blocking, as soon as that he feels that guard or that tackle coming down, he coming right over the top of that thing, and he's looking for the football. The dude was scraping like a linebacker on the line of scrimmage in one particular play. I think it was against Alabama as well. And we know what type of offensive lineman they put out. Those guys are mountains of men. So he lines up inside too, over the nose quite a bit. So, that would be a nice little fit. He's over 300 pounds, so about 308, 307. So, he has enough weight. You don't necessarily look for the whole 320-pound guys anymore. Those days are gone. Sorry, T'Vondre Sweat.
We'll get to T'Vondre. We'll get to him later.
Oh yeah. I know we are. I just I want to make sure I gave that as a primer. Just make sure my boy's ready to roll. But yeah, I like the idea of the Falcons going, going with defense tackle in the first round. But like you said, it has to be a trade back. I don't see anybody that is on that level to be taking that 8. But I like the idea of them trading back, getting a couple extra picks, and kind of see how the draft plays out from an edge rusher standpoint. If they do go D tackle in the first round, whether they kind of fall with taking care of a big need that is a guy coming off that edge, being able to rush the passer.
Yeah, and to me, it was interesting seeing today Bill Barnwell for ESPN. He does an annual sort of not really a mock draft, but he just basically proposes a trade for each pick in the first round. And he had 3 different proposals for the Falcons, all of them sort of moving back, picking up an extra third. I think one was going from 8 to 10, one was going from 8 to 11. I think another one was going from 8 to 13. And it's interesting. Yeah, I think in a world where, and I think the general consensus of where guys like Murphy and Newton, the first D tackle, might go 18, I think is a lot of people sort of thinking, where Cincinnati's picking. They lost DJ Reader this offseason to the Lions, and could use another body on the interior. And so like I can imagine a world where the Falcons move back a couple of picks. Maybe someone comes in and takes whoever their top edge rusher on their board is, and if you're settling, air quotes, for a D tackle, that I think a lot of people think like either one of these guys, Byron Murphy or Johnny Newton. Some people, I think, have argued that these guys are better than any of the edge rushers in this draft class. So to me, it makes a ton of sense. You mentioned Murphy sort of being able to kind of do double duty, be sort of the heir apparent as your, 3 technique opposite Grady Jarrett, but also maybe playing some nose and base defense. And as you said, I think everybody sort of assumes get the big run clogger in there, but base defense, like you don't play it like 20. I think the league wide, the trend was 24% of the time last year. Like, that's 15 snaps a game on average, right? So like, you don't really need to me devote significant resources to that position. You just get another guy in here. Maybe he rotates with LaCale London. You give Grady 3 of those snaps or whatever, as we've seen him do a couple of times, just to get a favorable matchup moving forward. So to me, D tackle does make a ton of sense. I don't think it's going to happen, but it is, at least now that we're, like 10 weeks into this draft process and we're a week away from the draft, we've exhausted every edge take there is at this point in time. And so
got nothing else. Got nothing.
I'm glad we're talking about something else other than, which edge rusher you have. So I think it's at least an interesting conversation. And I think also another interesting conversation is not just, D tackle in round 1, but what if the Falcons could go D tackle in rounds 3, 4, 5, and 6? I sound like LeBron James talking about, how many rings I'm going to win. But we'll break that down, guys, as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So I try to keep my competitive side tamped down, but sometimes you just got to unleash it. And one of the ways I feed my competitive side is with Monopoly Go. And I'm sure you've heard of it because it's been downloaded over 150 million times. It's a great twist on Monopoly, where you play on not one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building amazing cities that bring you big money. But the best part is having fun with your friends. And by fun, I mean messing with your friends, because you get to charge them rent on those iconic Monopoly properties, just like classic Monopoly. And you can rob their vaults too, so that their money becomes your money, or my money in this case. And, whether you want to team up with your friends or show that competitive side to your friends and all the people around the world in time tournaments, you can earn huge rewards. So get in the game, join your friends, download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. Again, that's Monopoly Go for free in the App Store or Google Play. So let's wrap up today's Locked On Falcons here with Jarvis Davis of Locked On Sports Atlanta. And I'm going to plug the Locked On Falcons podcast. Let's hit that subscribe button. We're trying to get to 10,000 followers in the next week. I know like 48% of you guys watching it, or 52%, whatever the percentage is, watch the show but aren't subscribed to the show. So hit that subscribe. Let's get to 10,000 before the draft. And also I want to plug the Locked On Falcons Insiders, right? At the link in the description below at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnFalcons. And if you join now, you'll be able to get my Jared Verse breakdown. And we talk more about the edge rushers. Just did a film rewatch of him, as well as Dallas Turner and Laiatu Latu in recent weeks. And you get sort of my thoughts on all those guys. And, with Verse, very powerful player, but, I thought this rewatch of all 3 of the top edgers was worthwhile, because I wound up coming a little bit lower on all 3 of those guys than where I was maybe a month or so ago, going through the film. And so that does maybe open the door for the Falcons to go in a different direction in round 1. And I'd be more open to that than maybe I was a month ago before I did this film breakdown. So check that out, guys, at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnFalcons. Not only do you get access to that, you get my thoughts on the film breakdowns of the free agent pickups, the top quarterbacks, some of the top receivers in the draft class, as well as you get that one-on-one connection with me. You can ask questions. You can, hit me up at 12 a.m. at night, being like, what do you think about this guy? Some people do that. So take advantage of it. It's 14-day free trial. Then it's $4.99 a month after that. So check it out if you want to get some premium content for free for the next 2 weeks. So check that out in the link in the description below. But let's wrap up today, Jarvis, by talking about, dream scenarios, right? Because our good friend Marcus Mosher of Locked On Cowboys recently did a 7-round mock draft for the 33rdteam.com, in which he had the Falcons selecting 8 defensive players in this draft, right? I'll go through. First round, they had them taking Dallas Turner, the edge rusher from Alabama. Okay. Second round, taking a cornerback, TJ Tampa at Iowa State. Okay. Third round picks were T'Vondre Sweat, the defensive tackle that was Byron Murphy's teammate at Texas. Also, Braylon Trice, the edge rusher from Washington. Fourth round, another D tackle, and Leonard Taylor from Miami. Fifth round, another D tackle, and Mekhi Wingo from LSU. Sixth round, a linebacker, Jalen Ford from Texas. And the other 6th round pick being another D tackle, Gabe Hall from Baylor, our guy from the Senior Bowl. Yes. And so, again, all 8 picks on defense, 6 of the 8 picks used on the front. Clearly, Marcus was telling us that he does not have any respect for anybody that plays in the front for the Atlanta Falcons. And I understand it, right? So, Jarvis, I ask you, is this your dream scenario for a Falcons draft this year?
Oh, wow. I wouldn't say dream. Like, if he had gone with a couple of edge rushers and later on in the rounds, like, don't get me wrong. Let me start with the whole Gabe Hall pick. That, like, whoever gets him, they're going to get a nice guy, a guy they're going to be able to, if he gets up in the right system, I feel like he's going to be a guy that kind of really flourish because, going in those lower rounds, the pressure's not as on as much to come in and be that starter right away and immediately produce. So I think he'll be in the right system. I feel like he'll really flourish. But you talking about going D tackle that much? I don't know if I would go that far because, like you said, David Onyemata can still play, and Grady Jarrett, as long as he don't have any hiccups or anything like that, he can still play football. So I wouldn't necessarily go all in like that. But if you telling me that, hey, you jumped in on another edge rusher in the mid to late rounds, a guy that didn't necessarily put up the nice numbers, but you like what you see as far as from a technical standpoint, and you like what he does on third down, you like the repertoire that he brings, and you feel like it'll transfer to the next level, yeah, take a chance on those guys. Or go and double down on corner. I wouldn't mind if you did that as well, or maybe even throw a safety in there, right? Because we understand Richard Grant going into his last year of his contract, it's gonna look like it's gonna re-up to me. So especially when you're talking about a guy that was drafted in the 2nd round. So I feel like, I get the whole, it's a dream scenario for him to go all in on defense, but as far as going all in on the defensive tackle position, it's kind of a little weird.
Yeah. I get that. Obviously, I'm not a huge fan of the T'Vondre Sweat pick, going back to the issues we just talked about, where you don't need the size. Like, Sweat's a fun player, but like I worry about the conditioning. And I remember that being a talking point with Jordan Davis. And I felt like Jordan Davis's conditioning is not nearly as big a question mark as it is with T'Vondre Sweat right now. And we've seen Jordan Davis really struggle to stay on the field for more than like 2 snaps in a given game in a row. And so that's a concern to me. But the one thing, certain players aside, I do like the idea of this draft. Like, there is a part of me, like, I look back at what the Packers did last year, right? They took Lucas Van Ness in the 1st round, who I was not a huge fan of. I was like, this is a late 1st round guy, kind of a one-note developmental guy. Has some upside, but like, it's going to take him a while to get there. But what I loved about the Packers draft is they came back on day 3. They got Kobe Wooden from D tackle from Auburn, who I really liked. Yep. And then they got Carl Brooks from Bowling Green in the 6th round. And when you look at the production that Carl Brooks had as a rookie, it was the same as Lucas Van Ness's production. And like, coupled with Kenny Clark and Devontae Wyatt and Rashawn Gary, they already had pieces up front. But Obviously, the Falcons aren't starting with that point, but I do like the idea of the Falcons going, taking 3 or 4 or more bites at the apple to make sure that they have a strong foundation for a rotation for years to come, right? Because when I look at this group, as much as we love Grady Jarrett and David Onyemata, both of these guys might only play maybe 1 or 2 more years in Atlanta, right? Yeah. And so, you don't want to get caught with your pants down, so to speak, for when you're after dealing with, the post Grady Jarrett, the post David Onyemata era, where similar to, you look at a lot of the problems the Falcons have dealt with. I've said this before in the podcast, like a lot of it stems from them not really having a plan after Matt Ryan and Julio Jones on the offensive side of the ball. You don't want to have that situation on the defensive side of the ball. And the idea of let's take 3 swings on day 3 at D tackle with Leonard Taylor and Mekhi Wingo and Gabe Hall, one of these guys is going to hit, right?
Hit. Yeah.
One of these guys is going to be a good player, and whatever we get from the other two, hey, awesome. And so, like, I like that idea. Again, I could probably, me and Marcus can argue about, which specific guys I would target in some of these spots, but to me, the idea of just like, let's get 6 guys up front that, not all of them are going to be home runs, but if we can get 2 or 3, 50-50 hit rate on 6 guys, we get 3 of these guys turn into good players in the NFL. That's going to take us a lot further than the usual strategy, which the Falcons often employs. Let's just draft 1 guy, and we'll just put all our chips on that 1 guy to work out. And as we are here because that has not worked in their favor too much.
And I think and that's like the model that the Chiefs use too when they talked about the cornerback position and how they addressed it. They went HBCU players and whoever, from the guy McDuffie, and all that stuff. Like, they took multiple chances on guys, and whether it be in the same draft or in back-to-back drafts, like that's how you plan for the, like you say, the immediate, in the short term and the long term, because you can't say, hey, we're going to draft Vic Beasley and that's it, and now we've addressed our issues. Now we move on to like go. There's some guys in the later on in that particular draft too. So you need to take a look at those guys as well. So yeah, I like I like the idea of double dipping or triple dipping into the same position, because at the end of the day, you got to trust your guys. If you don't trust your guys to hit at least 1 out of 3, or 2 out of 3 of those on those picks later on in the rounds, then they don't need to be at your job. Because, hey man, I need you to focus in on this position right here, because we got everybody else worried about everything else. We need to focus you on this guys. And you say, oh, you got 3 guys that we got the potential to get? Yeah, let's go. We're going with all of them. And because if those bad boys mess around and all of them hit, my goodness, you talking about an immediate jump. Like, you talking about guys being circled, multiple guys being circled in game planning on Sundays at 1:00. We're like, oh man, we got to worry about 97 and 90. Oh, but they got this other cat too, 99 and 94, 93. When they rotate in, it's not that big of a drop off. So that's what you want teams to start looking at your defense and saying, like, that's why I say, like, yeah, that would be ideal for me if they were to just focus in on the edge rusher spot. If you get it in the first round, cool. Let's go ahead and get in that mid round too. Because guess what? You talking about cheap labor. And the more cheap labor that you can get that can contribute right away, you worry about the contract stuff later. Well, we want to get all this stuff right now and get it on the field and win more than 7 damn games.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mentioned the Packers because I thought the Packers defensive line really asserted their will on the Falcons offensive line in that game. And probably, we had some individuals throughout the rest of the season, like Brian Burns and Derek Brown and Jeffrey Simmons, that really asserted their will in certain games, but it felt like everybody was getting wins in that Packers game. And like, that's what I'm just like,
different when it's a group, man.
Yeah.
When the whole group is just like teeing off on your offensive line, you're like, Arthur Smith didn't know what the hell to do. It's just like, all right, Dez, you got to figure something out.
He just needed Bijan to just like be Bijan for,
exactly
guys missing the backfield. And like, it was a problem. And it goes back to one of the things we talked about when they hired Ryan Nielsen last year, and I know he's gone now, but we talked about having that deep rotation of players. That's what he had in New Orleans, where there were 3 or 4 guys at the top, like Cam Jordan and David Onyemata, et cetera, that were the money makers. But like they didn't have any problem subbing out those guys throughout the game, keeping those guys fresh because of the deep rotation. And that's something that the Packers can do. They can limit Rashawn Gary snaps. They can limit Devontae Wyatt snaps and Kenny Clark. They can only put those guys out there on 3rd and 7 or when they need them, because they have, they've invested resources into the rest of that unit to build up a strong rotation. And I would love to see that here. I think the Falcons are starting that process, but let's accelerate it a little bit. And that's what I want to talk about with Marcus's draft. Again, you can, as we've discussed, like you can sit there and say, what about this need? What about that need? What about this player, that player? But the idea of it, taking, multiple bites at the apple, to me makes a ton of sense. But any final thoughts, Jarvis, before we duck out of here?
Yeah, the Falcons don't need to draft a wide receiver.
Okay. I don't, it's not like someone on this podcast had the Falcons drafting a wide receiver in their recent Locked On mock draft or anything like that. So I don't think you have to worry about that.
See, here's the thing though, man. Like for you, like you want to be able to see that 2016 offense, right? I'm assuming that 33 points a game looks really good to you right about now, right? Because the offense has been so inept for ever since 2017, right? It's been a while. That's what, 7 years, since we've seen an offense that's capable of doing something, right? But for me, like it's the total opposite. Like I saw a stat, man. The Falcons have been in the top 10 of sacks since 2004, dude. And that's when they led the league in sacks. That seems like such a long time ago. That's 20 years ago. 2 decades. And then John Abraham is the last individual guy. What, that 2007, 2008? We talking about 16 years ago. Look at my math. I'm on it today, man. So, but yeah, man, like that's my dream. I'm telling y'all. Locked On Falcons insiders, like everybody, listen up. I'm telling you, you will feel so good if you see multiple guys winning on 3rd and long. I'm telling you, it is the greatest feeling in the world. Absolutely. I remember when I played college ball and I used to watch guys, because I was run stopper. I ain't gonna even act like I ain't gonna even flex. I'm taking on double teams, triple teams sometimes. Like, hey man, you ain't gonna run the ball on us. But to celebrate with my guys, when multiple guys meeting at the quarterback, man, what? In Mercedes-Benz? What? Come on, man. God, Steve, man. Man, I'm telling you, like, let's get some more out of Kyle Pitts, man. We don't need no more wide receivers, man. Get some more out of him. Like, I want to see if he's for real or not. Probably not, but like, let's get some production out of those guys that you got on the field already.
Okay, that's
like, offensive got enough love. You know what I mean? Money.
Jarvis, the reality is we're talking about what sextuple dipping in terms of pass rushers here. It makes a lot more sense if they go wide receiver in round 1. So I don't know. You swing back, you get the wide receiver, and then you go get 5 defensive players. After that,
probability goes up when you do it in the first round, though. Aaron, come on now, man. Stay with me, dog. Stay focused, man. It's been too long since we've been talking about this draft, man. Like, I'm ready for it to get here.
So as Jarvis said, we are all ready for the draft to get here, and we only got a couple of more shows before now and then to get you geared up. Make sure you check out the Locked On NFL mock draft on the Locked On NFL Draft YouTube and podcast feeds. And of course, become a Locked On Falcons insider so you can get that Jared Verse, Laiatu Latu, Dallas Turner, as well as other film breakdowns by hitting that link in the description below at joinsubtext.com/Locked On Falcons. Guys, it is all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every